300 Comanche warriors don't form a protective wall around a single farm unless that farm belongs to someone extraordinary, or someone foolish enough to defy an entire town. Samuel Sam Holloway was about to prove he was both. But this story doesn't start with warriors. It starts with a town meeting that went horribly wrong. September 1876. The town of Redemption Creek, Colorado, sat nestled in a valley where tensions between settlers and the Ute tribes had been simmering for months. At 41 years old, Sam Holloway owned a modest ranch on the outskirts of town. He kept to himself mostly, working his land with just 2 hired hands and a stubborn mule named Moses. He wasn't rich, wasn't poor, just a man trying to make an honest living in a place where honesty was becoming increasingly rare. The trouble started on a Thursday evening when Mayor Hiram Blackwood called an emergency town meeting. Sam rode in late, tying his horse outside the general store where everyone had gathered. Inside, the air was thick with anger and fear. Blackwood stood on a makeshift platform, his face red, as he addressed the crowd of nearly 60 settlers. "We cannot allow these savages to think they can pass through our land freely," Blackwood shouted, slamming his fist on a barrel. 3 Ute families were spotted near the northern pass yesterday. They claim they're just traveling through to their winter hunting grounds, but I say it's reconnaissance. They're planning something. Sam listened from the back, his jaw tightening. He'd seen those families himself 2 days ago. An elder, some women, and children. They looked tired, not threatening. They'd asked him for nothing, just nodded respectfully as they passed by his property line. "I propose we form armed patrols," the mayor continued. "Any native found within 5 miles of town gets turned back at gunpoint. No exceptions. No negotiations." The crowd erupted in approval. Men who'd never held a rifle were suddenly eager for confrontation. Sam felt his stomach turn. This wasn't about protection. This was about fear, turning good people into something ugly. That's when Sam made his first mistake. Or maybe it was the only right thing he could have done. He raised his hand and spoke loud enough to cut through the noise. "Those families you're talking about have children with them. Babies, even. You really want to point guns at babies?" The room went silent. Every face turned toward him. Mayor Blackwood's eyes narrowed with barely concealed contempt. "Well, if it isn't Sam Holloway," the mayor said with mock politeness. "The man who thinks he knows better than the rest of us. Tell me, Sam, when the Ute decide to raid our town, will your sympathy stop their arrows?" Sam stepped forward, refusing to back down. "I'm not saying we shouldn't be cautious. I'm saying there's a difference between caution and cruelty. Those people aren't warriors. They're families trying to survive the coming winter, just like us." A voice from the crowd shouted out, "My brother was killed by natives 3 years ago. You telling me we should just forget that?" Sam shook his head. "I'm not telling you to forget anything. I'm telling you that pointing guns at children won't bring your brother back. It'll just create more widows and orphans on both sides." The crowd's mood shifted from angry to hostile. A rancher named Dutch Keller stood up, his massive frame blocking the lamplight. "You sound like a native lover, Holloway. Maybe you should go live with them if you care so much." Sam felt the trap closing around him, but something deeper than self-preservation was driving him now. "Maybe I do care. Maybe that makes me foolish. But I'd rather be a fool than a man who threatens babies because he's too scared to see them as human." That was when Mayor Blackwood played his final card. He pulled out a piece of paper and held it up for everyone to see. This is a petition. Every business owner, every landowner in Redemption Creek has signed it. It states that anyone who aids, shelters, or shows comfort to hostile natives will be considered an enemy of this community. Sam's blood ran cold. Hostile natives. That phrase could mean anything, could mean everyone. Sign it, Sam, the mayor said quietly, or pack your things and leave. Those are your only options. Sam looked around the room at faces he'd known for years. Mrs. Henderson, who'd brought him soup when he had pneumonia. Young Timothy, who he'd taught to ride a horse. Deputy Crawford, who'd shared whiskey with him after his wife passed. Every single one of them was staring at him with eyes that said the same thing. Choose us or choose them. Sam walked up to the platform, took the pen from Blackwood's hand, and for a moment, everyone thought he was going to sign. Instead, he set the pen down carefully and spoke in a voice that didn't shake despite the fear coursing through him. I won't sign something that goes against everything decent. If that means I'm not welcome here anymore, then I guess I'm not welcome. The silence that followed was broken by Dutch Keller's booming laugh. Then get out. You've got until sunrise tomorrow. After that, anyone who does business with you answers to us. Sam rode home that night knowing his life had just changed forever. What he didn't know was that 5 miles away, in a Ute camp hidden in the foothills, a young warrior named Tall Elk had been watching the lights of Redemption Creek and wondering if the time for peace had finally passed. The next morning, Sam woke to find a crude message painted on his barn door. Native lover, go back where you came from. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been born in this valley, had more right to be here than half the people in town. But rights didn't matter anymore. Only fear mattered now. His 2 hired hands quit before breakfast. Can't afford to be associated with you, one of them mumbled, unable to meet Sam's eyes. The general store refused to sell him supplies. The bank informed him his line of credit was suspended. In less than 24 hours, Sam Holloway had become a ghost in his own community. But Sam was stubborn. He'd been called worse things than stubborn over the years. Mule-headed, his late wife used to say with affection. So instead of packing up and leaving like the town wanted, Sam doubled down. He worked his land alone, fixing fences and tending livestock with only Moses the mule for company. 3 weeks passed. The first snow came early that year, dusting the valley in white and bringing with it a cold that promised a brutal winter ahead. That's when Sam found them. A Ute family, 2 adults and 3 children, huddled in his barn seeking shelter from a storm. They'd been traveling for days, trying to reach their tribe's winter camp, but one of the children had fallen sick with fever. Sam stood in the barn doorway, lantern in hand, looking at 5 pairs of eyes that expected violence or rejection. The father stood protectively in front of his family, speaking in broken English. Please. Just one night. Child very sick. We leave at morning light. Sam thought about the town's ultimatum. He thought about everything he'd already lost by standing up for what was right. He thought about how much easier his life would be if he just turned these people away. Then he looked at the sick child, a girl no more than 6 years old, shivering despite the blankets her mother had wrapped around her. And Sam made his second big mistake. Or maybe, once again, it was the only right thing he could do. Come inside, Sam said, gesturing toward his cabin. The barn's too cold for a sick child. I've got a fire going and some hot stew left over." The father's eyes widened in disbelief. "You help us, even though your people hate us?" "My people don't speak for me," Sam replied. "And a sick child is a sick child. Doesn't matter what language she speaks." The family stayed 3 days while the storm raged outside. Sam gave them his bed, sleeping on the floor by the fire. He shared his dwindling food supplies and used what little medicine he had to bring down the girl's fever. The father, whose name Sam learned was Running Deer, tried to offer payment. Beaded items, furs, anything of value. Sam refused. "You don't owe me anything. Just get your family to safety when the weather clears." But Running Deer looked at Sam with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You have shown us kindness when your own people cast you out. That is not a debt easily forgotten. My brother is Chief Gray Wolf of the Northern Ute. He will hear of this." Sam shrugged. "Don't need anyone hearing about anything. Just take care of that little girl." What Sam didn't know was that his cabin was being watched. Dutch Keller and 2 other men from town had been keeping an eye on the outcast rancher, waiting for him to make a mistake they could use against him. When they saw smoke from Sam's chimney and shadows of multiple people moving inside, they'd seen enough. The family left on the 4th day when the storm finally broke. The little girl's fever had passed, and though still weak, she smiled at Sam before they departed. Running Deer clasped Sam's hand in both of his and spoke words in Ute that Sam didn't understand. But he understood the emotion behind them: gratitude, respect, brotherhood. 2 hours after the family left, a group of 20 men from Redemption Creek rode up to Sam's property. Mayor Blackwood sat at the front, his face twisted with righteous anger. Dutch Keller was there too, along with Deputy Crawford and half the town council. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change everything. "We warned you, Holloway," the mayor said, not bothering to dismount. "You harbored natives in direct violation of our agreement." "I didn't sign any agreement," Sam replied calmly, though his hand instinctively moved closer to the rifle leaning against his porch railing. "That family you helped? They're probably scouting for a raid right now. You've endangered every man, woman, and child in Redemption Creek." Sam's patience finally snapped. That family had a sick child, a little girl burning up with fever. What kind of monster turns away a dying child? "The kind who wants his own children to live," Dutch Keller growled. "You made your choice, Holloway. Now live with the consequences." What followed was methodical and cruel. They didn't burn his property. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they took his tools. They opened his grain silos and scattered his winter feed across the ground. They broke his plow and cut his well rope. They poisoned his water trough and scattered his chickens. When they were done, Sam's ranch was still standing, but barely functional. "You've got no supplies, no credit in town, and winter's coming," Blackwood said as they prepared to leave. "You'll be dead or gone by spring. Either way, you won't be our problem anymore." Sam stood alone in the wreckage of his livelihood and did something he hadn't done since his wife died. He sat down in the dirt and let himself feel the weight of his choices. He'd done the right thing. He knew he'd done the right thing. But the right thing was going to kill him. Winter came fast and hard that year. By November, snow covered everything in a thick white blanket that turned the valley into a frozen wasteland. Sam's supplies ran dangerously low. He hunted what he could, trapped rabbits, and the occasional deer. But it wasn't enough. He lost weight. His cabin grew colder as his firewood dwindled. Moses the mule looked at him with sad eyes that seemed to ask why they were suffering. Sam had accepted that he probably wouldn't see spring. He'd made peace with it in the quiet way that stubborn men do. He'd lived according to his principles, and if that meant dying alone in a frozen cabin, well, there were worse ways to go. Then came the morning that changed everything. Sam woke to a sound he couldn't immediately identify. It was rhythmic, powerful, like distant thunder, but constant. He stumbled to his window, weak from hunger and cold, and saw something that made him think he'd finally lost his mind. 300 warriors on horseback stood in formation around his property. Ute warriors, their winter gear decorated with feathers and paint, their faces stern and proud. They'd formed a complete circle around his ranch, and they weren't moving. They were just standing there like a human fortress. Sam grabbed his rifle more out of instinct than any real plan and stepped onto his porch. That's when he saw running deer dismounting from the front of the formation, accompanied by an older man whose bearing screamed authority. This had to be Chief Gray Wolf. The chief approached slowly, his English careful but clear. "You are the one called Sam Holloway, the one who saved my brother's family when they faced death." Sam nodded, too confused to speak. "My brother told me how your own people cast you out for showing mercy, how they destroyed your means of survival because you chose kindness over cruelty." Chief Gray Wolf gestured to the warriors behind him. "This is not acceptable." "I don't understand," Sam managed to say. "You showed my family honor when you had every reason not to. You suffered for doing what was right." The chief's voice grew stronger. "Now we return that honor. These warriors will protect your land through the winter. Anyone who comes to harm you will face all of us." Sam felt his legs go weak. "I can't ask you to do that. Your people need those warriors for hunting, for protection. You did not ask. We offer. There is a difference." Chief Gray Wolf looked back at the massive formation of warriors. "Word of what you did has spread through all the Ute camps. You have become a symbol, a reminder that not all white men have closed their hearts. That is worth protecting." Over the next 3 months, the warriors rotated in shifts, always maintaining a presence around Sam's ranch. They brought him food when his supplies ran low. They helped him repair the damage the townspeople had done. They taught him their winter survival techniques. And most importantly, they sent a message to Redemption Creek that couldn't be ignored. The message was simple. Touch this man and face 300 warriors. Mayor Blackwood tried to organize a militia to drive the natives away, but nobody in town was stupid enough to attack that many armed warriors. Dutch Keller talked big in the saloon, but never rode out to confront them. The town that had been so eager to punish Sam for his compassion now had to watch as he survived the winter under native protection. But something else happened too, something unexpected. A few brave souls from Redemption Creek started riding out to Sam's ranch with supplies. First it was just Mrs. Henderson with a basket of bread. Then young Timothy brought some preserved meat his family could spare. Even Deputy Crawford showed up one night with a bottle of whiskey and an apology. "I was wrong," Crawford said simply. "We all were. You showed more courage than any of us." By spring, the snow had melted, and the warriors prepared to return to their camps. Chief Gray Wolf came to say goodbye, clasping Sam's hand in a grip that spoke of mutual respect. "You will always have friends among the Ute," the chief said. "Our children will hear the story of the white rancher who chose righteousness over acceptance. That is a legacy worth more than gold." Sam watched them ride away, 300 warriors disappearing into the hills like ghosts. His ranch had survived. He had survived. And somehow, in the process of being cast out by his own people, he'd found belonging with another. Redemption Creek eventually changed. Not overnight, not completely, but enough. Sam became a bridge between the town and the tribes, helping negotiate peaceful passages and trade agreements. He never got rich, never became mayor, or gained any official title. But he lived to be 67, dying peacefully on his ranch, surrounded by friends from both cultures who had learned that sometimes the strongest walls aren't made of wood or stone. They're made of 300 warriors willing to stand in the snow for a man who fed a hungry child. If you're loving these incredible stories of courage from the Old West, smash that subscribe button, because we've got more tales that'll restore your faith in humanity. Click the video on your screen right now for another story even more powerful than this one.